Shabbat Shalom. At an early age, we are taught, love your neighbor as you love yourself. It's an awfully complex idea that is not necessarily all that comprehensible to adults either, and yet we expect children to sign on the dotted line that they acknowledge receipt of this burden and to undertake to honor and fulfill it as best they can. Amongst other things, this teaching expresses the expectation of every individual to develop the capacity to see beyond just themselves and their own needs. But arguably, extending love to one's neighbor is still not such a tall order. Open your front door, look to the left down your street, look to the right up your street, and what do you see? For the most part, I guess you'll see other people whose lifestyles are not all that different to yours, in order to be able to live, well, wherever we live. Lifestyles are not that different. Neighbors have similar levels of education and social mobility, and I'll be so bold as to suggest that in most cities in America, there's a strong chance that the people we live close by to are more than likely of the same race as us. So loving one's neighbor, as it turns out, is not all that challenging, because we can relate to them. But loving the stranger, well, now that's where it really begins to get tricky. Just how much are we supposed to love them? How far do we need to go in order to prove that we're doing our part to uphold what is known in Leviticus chapter 19 verse 18 as the golden rule, love your neighbor as you love yourself? Well, this week's Torah reading, Nasso, in the book of Numbers, B'midbar, seems to recognize, if not overtly, that loving the stranger is a good deal more complicated. And yet, it's not something that we are allowed to overlook. And the stranger whom we wrong is no less deserving of justice and compensation than our own kinsman should be, which is to acknowledge that at times, indeed, we fail to love our neighbor, we fail to love the stranger. And when that happens, we are required to acknowledge our guilt and to make right. The Midbar Rabbah teaches that the Torah laid down equal treatment of the native Israelite and the proselyte, and taking by violence from either must be expiated by payment of a fine and an atonement offering. We're not comfortable with guilt, even though it offers us an opportunity. It offers us an opportunity to correct the past, to make amends, and together with one's victim, to find a way to move forward. In the Jewish magazine, which is known by the name The Forward, of June 2nd, Matt Nozenchuk, Rachel Timmer, and Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum wrote the following. As Jews, our hearts and souls ache with the disconnect between our values and this moment. In America, our society has too often failed to treat every individual as if they were formed b'tselem Elokim, as if they were formed equally in the divine image. The events of the past 2 weeks have again made clear another revelation. As individuals and as a Jewish community, we must recognize that the promise of equal justice under the law remains out of reach in a system infected with structural racism. We must show our black and brown siblings that we see the racism and violence coursing through our society, and we must be prepared to take responsibility not only for our transgressions, but also for our silence. They write, it starts at home. As a Jewish community, our best institutions have undertaken anti-racist work both within and beyond the synagogue walls. But the process has only just begun, and making our voices heard against racism and against police brutality in this moment is a requisite step in that march towards justice. And so, my friends, this has been an introduction from me to you this week to a discussion that I had earlier this week with a member of our own Temple Beth David family in an attempt to understand an America that most of us do not live in, certainly most of us in the Temple Beth David community. It's my hope that you will join me by watching this discussion, and then that you will continue the discussion yourselves by adding your voices to it and joining with others throughout our Rochester community. Shabbat Shalom. Okay, so hi, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you being willing to speak with me about what's been happening in our lives, in our country recently. If there's any point that you want to stop or take a break or say to me, edit that out, feel free, go ahead.
I'm good.
Great. So I follow the conservative columnist David Brooks in the New York Times. He's an interesting guy. Last week he was on on PBS NewsHour on Friday night, and he said, reflecting on the week that ended on last Friday, he said, this has got to be one of the toughest weeks in America's history.
Yes.
We reached the point where 100,000 people in our country died of a global pandemic. A lot closer to home, besides just the global impact, George Floyd was brutally killed in the most unjust and sickening of circumstances. And the response of our leaders left a lot to be desired. And I wonder how you're doing.
Well, there was a moment or two or three where I was very angry. Then there's moments, and they could be in the same day, where I'm just like, I want to move. I want to move somewhere. I want to go off grid and be somewhere where I don't have to hear about this. I wish I didn't have social media. Why me? Why do people, why us? Why did we get chosen to be Black? But luckily I have friends that are mature, and I follow good things on social media that educate and teach me about wellness and self-care. As it's traumatic. It's traumatic for people who are not people of color, but especially for people of color, especially for people that are dealing with a pandemic anyway. It's really hard. And at the same time, I always want to be a good person. And I don't want to have a mindset, why be good? And, if this is the kind of things that happens, but I'm doing a lot better now because of, as you know, some justice, it's being served. So.
One of the things that makes a trauma hard to deal with is when one is constantly reminded of that trauma, constantly taken back. And it's not as if you can learn to deal with it and then move forward in your life and live life differently.
Right.
So what we all saw on our screens happening to George Floyd, it's not the first time we've seen it. It's not the first time that Black people in America have lived it. It just keeps on happening over and over again. You know, how do you live a life of, you know, going up and down all the time, just when you think it's over and you can come down from this? Well, it happens again. How does one learn to adapt and live with such constant ups and downs and recurrences of the nightmare?
Yes. Well, every time I see that video, you would think I would get desensitized, every time I watch it, it hurts as bad. I can almost feel the pressure on my neck, and that's over 8 minutes. And, you know, not to be flippant, sometimes just waiting for the microwave for 2 minutes is an eternity. Somebody being on your neck for 8 minutes and knowing they're being videotaped and your coworkers don't say anything. And of course, the most heartbreaking part is when he calls for his mother, who's been dead for 2 years, I believe. Don't I know? Like that is, and then later on, you find out what a gentle giant he was, and he has a 6-year-old, and all the circumstances, and you know what I found was good was to sometimes I did have to unplug and go to Netflix, which Netflix can be a little dark too. But, you know, I sometimes just had to sit with peace, with nothing, maybe sit outside, some fresh air. And it was good because as I would be outside, maybe someone would be walking their dog and speak to me. And I'm reminded that everybody isn't horrible. And at the same time, plugging in is good because when I saw these people around the world, like Maori the Maori in New Zealand, they were doing a haka for George Floyd. When you saw those Mennonites, who told them? They were out. Like, so it sometimes it was too much, but then I read something, or you know somebody with influence did the right thing, and it would make me feel good. And also, being a Jew of color, I had to realize that the world we live in isn't perfect. And if I want, honestly, I should have chose a religion that would let me kind of sit down. But Judaism is social justice. What's it? Tzedek. Is it
Here.
Tirdof?
Yeah.
Like that's real. Like young and old Jews have this. Like you got to do the right thing by people. And I remember that, this is the world has had a history of people bullying people and doing cruel things. And, we've made strides, but we're not there yet. And we're going to continue to make strides. And some things were embarrassing on the news. And then some things were like, wow, I'm amazed, So that's helped me.
When you say that some things were embarrassing, have been embarrassing on the news, can you say more about that?
Well, of course, the looting was embarrassing because I don't think a lot of people sitting on their couch, maybe in suburbia, realize that the protesters and looters were not actually the same people. I witnessed it. I was outside. I'm maybe a mile away from the public safety building where the police car was set on fire. And some of the people that were coming out that evening were coming from the opposite direction, walking there. They were late for the protest, and they just wanted some, and then I started feeling like, oh my goodness, they're quote unquote animals. But then my African American literature professor, I follow her on Facebook, she said, we don't have the right to tell people that are being oppressed how to react if we've never lived it. I've been Black, but I've never been a Black man. I've never been harassed by the police. If anything, the interactions I've had with police were kind of comical ones, and so I can't say, point the finger. Then I have to remember that a man was killed, windows can be replaced. And just like people keep spouting, not all police are bad. You can't say all the protesters were up to bad, it goes the same way. And so that was, a little embarrassing. And, but at the same time, it doesn't take away from the cause of a human life and human lives. It was just some time ago, somebody was jogging, a person of color, he's jogging, he must be up to something. And people say, well, even if you stay in your house, well, a woman was in her house. Yeah. A man was on his couch and someone came in his apartment and killed him thinking it was theirs. So even in the safety of your, little hobbit hole, you're not even safe there as a person of color. You're a suspect even in your own home. So I have to remember some people see things differently than I. Maybe if I was a Black male in a lower income neighborhood and, I had a lot of run-ins with the justice system, I would see things different, So I had to I didn't have to be an apologist for them. I just had to be myself and be logical with people and have dialogues and invite dialogues, even if they didn't want it. Because, people are deleting each other left and right on social media and blocking people. And I made it clear, I'm not blocking anyone. I'm ready to have a conversation with anyone, and respectfully, and no shouting, and stick to the facts, So, but then there were things that made me very proud. I was very proud to be Jewish when I found out Chabad's statement about George Floyd. Like, that's unprecedented. They don't get involved in, those kind of things. And that article, it wasn't vague. It was very specific on a Black man's life being taken. And hatred is not even kosher. Hatred is not kosher. So, I've seen the worst of humanity and I've seen the best. But that's always, even during the pandemic, we saw the best and worst. We saw people, looking out for the nurses and doctors, and then you saw people that were price gouging. There's always people that profit off tragedy, and there's always people that, like, Mr. Rogers used to say, are the helpers, so.
You're describing what I think we would call resilience, your own ability and instinct to take care of yourself rather than to be totally dragged down to a place from which it becomes incredibly difficult to emerge and to climb back out of again.
Right.
So you've obviously learned, and it's a credit to your personality as well, to who you are, to your neshama, that you have these skills, you have these instincts to protect yourself, to, when necessary, tune out, so that you have the energy to tune back.
Thank you.
Instead of being tuned out permanently, which is not healthy either.
No.
So that is phenomenal. You also respond with just an exquisite sense of humility by saying there are people who have it worse. I've never been a man. But at the same time, without necessarily contradicting yourself, you do point out, but there are people who've, in the safety of their home, including Black women, including children, who are attacked for doing nothing. And so I can't help but ask the question, surely you encounter, or do you encounter racism in America as well as a Black woman?
That's a good question. And I don't get things like Jim Crow things happening. I get what they call microaggressions.
So
Okay.
say more about that.
A microaggression is just like the little things, the snide comment or the assumption, or like, for instance, people will say, so how many children do you have? I don't have any children. It's just assumed because I'm a Black woman that I'm, a fertility goddess having children all over the place. Or people will ask, how, they just things that they stereotypes, of course. Or if I'm being served at Wegmans, and there's two people in line, even though I was there before the other person, generally the person will address the Caucasian person first. And most of the Caucasian customer will say, no, she's next. But it's like, and another thing, one time I was at Wegmans and I was in the deli. Now, I won't spend money on clothes, but I will spend money on food. My clothes will come from the thrift store, but food, oh, I love it. So I wanted a pound of something. And the gentleman behind the counter said, well, it's this much a pound. I said, I don't recall asking you how much it cost. I said, I wanted it. So those kinds of things. Or if I'm going in a store, and it's sometimes I feel bad for the people in retail because you can't win. If you ignore me, I say, oh, they don't want my money. And if they give me too much attention, oh, they think I'm shoplifting, so, even on just these kind of crazy things. Oh, I bet you can cook, like a mammy trope. I can cook, but it's not because I'm Black or plus size. It's because I follow a recipe book, So those are the microaggressions. It would be like a Jewish person and you ask them, so what do you do? What are you, a lawyer? Were you a doctor? And they tell you, no, I'm a bartender. That's a microaggression. You're assuming, you know. Um, so, Jewish people get it as well. These assumptions. And so those are the ones, and they're kind of like a drip from a drain, a drip. It gets annoying after a while, but it's not going to break me. Whereas when my grandma grew up, you didn't go on this side of town at a certain time because you could get, attacked by a crowd of white people. Or, um, don't look at, if you're a Black young man and you see a white woman, you avert your eyes. That was in my father's lifetime. You know, you had Emmett Till.
Yes.
If people don't know who that is, Emmett Till, he was accused of whistling at a white woman, and he had a terrible, terrible murder. He was so maimed that they could hardly sew him back together. But his mother wanted him to have an open casket. She said, I want people to know what they did to my baby. And, that wasn't that long ago. His mother, was still alive while I was alive and had interviews about it. And it's been revealed that the woman who made the accusation lied. And that woman was still alive some years ago that told the men he did this to me, and she admitted she lied. And so I don't have those like in your face things. People have the fear of being exposed on Twitter and being canceled or being sued, and luckily I'm a woman of some heft. People probably aren't as awful to me because I can, maybe, fight them, So, and people try to be, there's these passive aggressive things that people do, like if I go to a swimming pool, maybe they think, gosh, I got to swim with her, So never have I had any major things. I've had incidents in my life, but nothing that's made me be like, oh, I hate white people. You know, I remember once I was on a school trip and we went on the Erie Canal, and I maybe was 8 or 9. I was sitting, and two little girls, they were looking for a seat, and there were 2 seats open by me. And I heard them say, oh, she's Black. We better not sit by her, you know. So things like that. And that wasn't all the time. There was, of course, white classmates that I went to their sleepovers. There were white classmates where we walked to school together. We were on softball team together. You know, I can remember the team was the Daisies, and I wasn't very good. you know, and even now, I have friends that I've reconnected with, that I went to school with or lived on the same street with, and they're like, "I saw your father. You know, your father still lives on my street," and I'm like, "Yeah, how, you know." So I've had, wonderful people in my life, and just a few incidences. And another incident as an adult that happened. This is another example of a microaggression. Um, I was living in Florida, and I wanted to take a few courses, college courses. So I went into the college's office. It was FLLC, Florida Community something. And the secretary, she had me wait and wait and wait. And finally she came to me and she said, what can I help you with? And she gave me the information, and she said, yeah, and if you need to take a remedial math class or anything. And I said, no. And it sounds like I was full of myself. I said, no, I'm kind of brilliant. I won't need a remedial anything. Which I do hate math, but she didn't need to know that. But, and so those kinds of things. And it's like, I can't believe, like I would call my mother and be like, I can't believe she sent this to me. Who the heck? But I just remember, and this is a very Musar thought. In Musar, we're taught people's experiences mold them. I don't know who her parents were. I don't know who, where she got this idea. And I just have to, sometimes you just have to be like, God, forgive them. They don't know. They don't know. So, and of course, being a Black Jew, I'm an anomaly, so I get it all the time. I'll show up at a service and people are like, oh, apologize, Hadassah, it's nice to meet you. But when I first saw you, I thought you were such and such's caregiver. And which I did used to be a caregiver, but no, I came to daven just like you, or I get, so what are you from, Ethiopia? Like nope, New York, born in Rochester. So that's kind of things. And everything I realize isn't meant with evil intent, and sometimes my non-Black friends, they're more militant than me. And I have to tell them, chill out. It's not that serious. They think I'm being slighted. I'm like, sit down, So.
If you think back, do you have any recollection, any impression of when you first became aware of race, of the concept, or of realizing that you're Black in America?
Probably once school started, you know, there were times I went to all white schools. I moved a lot. My mother moved around a lot. Sometimes I would be this relative or this one. And so I would be in spaces that I wasn't used to. And that's when I realized, even though I'm darker, before I knew we would look different, but I didn't realize how different we were until I went to school. And, how kids play and how they talk to each other and interact. And as I got older and older, I realized, maybe this boy in my class is getting mistreated because the teacher doesn't like him because he's just a Black boy, or maybe and that's the thing I just hate. I never know why someone doesn't like me. Is it because I'm a girl? because I'm Black? Like, what is it? Or maybe it's nothing. Maybe I just look like their Aunt, Tilly or something. I just don't know. So I remember taking clarinet, which I also was not that good at, but I took clarinet, and I remember the band teacher just gave me no attention whatsoever. And we all sounded terrible. You know, that duck, we sounded like the duck call. It was bad, okay? We were not like Benny Goodman or anything. We were awful. We were all equally awful. And he still gave the white girls more attention than me. And I can recall I got real huffy. Here's my temper. I got real huffy. And what was this, maybe 4th or 5th grade? And I jumped, and my clarinet case closed on a girl's cheek. So I was sent to the principal's office, and I'm sitting in the principal's office like a little criminal. But I was mad, and that's another thing. When you see people get loud or swear, or maybe they just had enough, maybe they take that aggression out on that storekeeper's window because they just had enough. Everybody has a threshold where they're just like, but at that day, I was really upset because I was working my hardest. And then I thought, what are you talking about? Black people invented jazz. How are you going to tell me I don't play clarinet? So, but I'm so lucky. I live in New York and not Mississippi. Like, there's places where just in this decade, they've had their first interracial proms. We're not talking about 1968. We're talking about the 2000s. And where you can definitely see a disparity between what a white school looks like and a Black school, what those kids' books look like and what their gyms look like. Whereas in New York, we're pretty, pretty liberal.
And so you're now pointing out that there are these silos, these various independent islands in America, that there are many Americas.
Right.
And you see yourself as fortunate to live in a liberal state because you're Black.
Mm-hmm.
I see myself as fortunate to live in a liberal state because I have 2 children with special needs. And so the education department therefore spends a lot more money on them than if I lived in most other states. And so it's interesting how many of us choose where we live based on what we're looking for society to offer us. Certain people, I guess, for whom it is very important to feel as free as possible to walk around toting firearms, will choose to live in states where that is the culture too. And they're not going to come and live here in New York State or in Massachusetts. And so we all make these choices, or many of us make choices based on what our personal needs are. But you are pointing out that race in particular is a complex thing. It's understood and related to differently in different parts of the country. And I wonder if you have any sense of what we as a country ought to be doing to address race in ways that might feel like we've just not done before.
Right. What I find is a lot of people, they don't even want to broach the subject. They want to hide it. And of course, it's people that their ancestors are going to look in a bad light. I had a boss of mine say, darn it, why are my kids always being told being white is horrible? We're horrible people. I guess something about Thanksgiving at the school or something. And I said, well, a history book is a history book. Maybe they don't want you guys making Thanksgiving such a big deal, because Native Americans, but I don't know, some people, the people that were quick to dismiss COVID and want to hurry up and open things and say, 2 weeks, start opening up things. I didn't get sick, my family, are the same people that don't want to talk about race. They don't want to talk about anything that makes them have to show a little humility and listen to another person. And I was just talking to someone the other day. It's almost like there's a chip in our society where some people don't get a dose of, some people get too much empathy, a dose, and then some people don't have enough. They really don't know how to look at life in someone else's shoes, whether it be a Syrian immigrant, whether it's somebody with a disability. They just only can see, you know, their household or what they're dealing with. Just like this whole, you know, all lives matter. People are so, I don't know if they're dense or what, but it's very simple. When I say, you know, save the whales, I'm not saying kill the jellyfish. It's saying right now, or when that was, you know, popular, whales were endangered. Or like how, this is a kind of a metaphor I've seen that works well. I'm at a funeral for a loved one, and I say, you know, make your donations to the Pancreatic Cancer Society. My uncle or whoever passed of pancreatic cancer. I hate cancer. And someone takes the microphone from me at the wake and says, well, such and such in my family, they had breast cancer. Well, it's right now, I'm the one mourning, I'm bereaved. This is what I'm focusing on. I'm not saying breast cancer is an equally a horrible, horrible thing. But right now, you know, it's about me. And people, if it's not about them, it's, you know, well, what about me? What about me? I'm not discrediting you, but I'm a minority. Every time I turn on the news, it's something crazy about abuse of a minority. And that could be a trans person, a Black person. So many things are going on. And usually the aggressor is a white person. So right now, I'm endangered. I'm like that whale. I'm an endangered species. So Black Lives Matter. And some people get it. You know, like Rabbi Settle. She has a Black Lives sign that kept getting stolen out of her yard. You know, there's a Unitarian church up the street. They've never taken their Black Lives Matter sign down. It stays up. And some people get it. It was kind of a PG-13 tirade, so I won't quote it, but the actor Seth Rogen on his Twitter, he was like, if you say all lives matter, I'm not making movies for you. And he actually said, expletive yourself. You know, he was going back. They were like, well, you know, he was like, you're crazy. Stop it. Unfollow me, you know. So I just think in general, whether it's coronavirus or racism or sexism, or people don't want to talk about uncomfortable things, especially if they're the ones shown in the negative light. And people don't understand, we're not singling you out, but let's be honest. If I'm out there protesting and you're out there protesting, you know, what can happen to us is going to be different, you know. And I've even had a woman who, she's a nurse now, but she used to do drugs. She's a white woman, and she used people's racism to benefit her and her habit. Her and her Black girlfriend used to go in places knowing that the white woman wouldn't be followed, the Black friend would. She'd be doing the shoplifting. And they did this all the time. So some people are really honest about their privilege. And that's another thing. People, white privilege, I've had it hard. My family came from Ireland and we had $2. You know, yeah, that's hard. That is hard. But add that with this, you still have an advantage. I have an advantage. I speak English. You know, that's a privilege some people don't have. They don't speak English. So maybe they don't get the job that I could get. So people need to understand, yeah, you do have privileges. You're not assumed to be a mother of 10 kids with the 20 baby daddies and, you know, a leech off the system, and I have, that I've been to jail, which I haven't, which is another privilege. I've never been to jail. I'm able to, do things that, have no problem voting in elections, getting a job. So even I have privileges. But imagine if you have those and so much more. You have a better zip code, you have Aryan features, So, like I said, it's going to take a measure of humility for people to just even have these conversations. And the people that are quote unquote woke, like I always teach you that, I say, you're so woke, Rabbi. But we get tired, but we really do. We have to educate people. And, I'm kind of like angry. Why me? I just want to, have a quiet life. Why do I have to be the one to educate people just because I was born with some more melanin than you? Because at the end of the day, that's all that separates us. People are shocked that they go to a Black home. Oh, it's like my home. There's one time Bill O'Reilly went to a Black restaurant in Harlem. He goes, "Oh, it's so nice and clean," which is like, what? We're not aliens. We do what you do. Maybe with a little more flavor, but we do what you do. We're not that different. So
you've there's a lot to comment on. You call me woke, which I take as a huge compliment, and yet I saw something on Facebook this last week which was really powerful and really struck me. That was a message to white people that as much as you think and really want to understand, you don't.
yeah,
You never will.
yeah, because it's a privilege. Sorry to interrupt. It's a privilege if you only have to be educated about racism and not live it. That is a privilege.
So
not have these experiences.
What are the kinds of things, and I don't even like the question that's about to come out of my mouth. What are the kinds of things that you would recommend that white people ought to do to, even though they'll never fully get there in terms of understanding, at least getting closer, at least stretching their minds to entertain the experiences of others who might just live a few miles from their own doorstep, but which nonetheless are totally foreign to them?
Right. I would say there are opportunities sometimes where congregations have interfaith. You come to our temple and you visit our church, or if you are in the library, I hope they open soon. I so miss the library. Get out of your comfort zone and maybe pick up a book by a Black author. I know how many books I've read by white authors. See what a Black author has to say. And I would recommend, my favorite is James Baldwin. I mean, he's so eloquent, and and I'm sorry people slept on him while he was alive. Now he's dead. People are like, oh, he's brilliant. Go on, we're so lucky we have this technology. We have YouTube, look at a TED talk, look up, the people who started the Black Lives Matter movement on a TED talk or something. Just widen your horizons. Try something new. It's no different than me. I've never had, say Korean food. Let me try it, Let me maybe go on YouTube and learn a little bit about their culture, because I think it was Mark Twain, and he basically was like, people that travel, the more you travel, the more your horizons are opened. And, I noticed that people that have left their town, there's people who never left their town, they're so very provincial. They're those people that can go anywhere and fit in and go by customs and know when I'm in an Asian home, I take my shoes off. And I mean, isn't that beautiful? You know, that you don't have to hate your culture to appreciate another culture, you know. And if you have the luxury of having a Black coworker, and at the same time, I say this, don't stress us Black people out or people of color, you know, with your guilt over being privileged. You know, we got enough of our own stuff. But if there's time, sure, we'll explain something to you, you know, maybe you don't understand, you know, or how we feel about something, you know, and be respectful, you know, and we will, you know, freely express ourselves just like I am to you today, you know, and it's how you approach us. Like, nobody wants to hear, how come Black people do this? Or how come Puerto Ricans do this? Or how come, why did the Jewish people, why y'all do this? That is horrible, that phrasing. Or, but how about this? People have asked me. I'm going to my first funeral of an African-American colleague. What can I expect? And we'll tell you, well, this is our traditions, this is our customs. And it's no different than people have asked me, I gotta go to a Shiva. What do I have to? And I tell you, and I'm lucky enough, it's almost like I have these two cultures in me. And so people, it's so funny, my friends that were born Jewish, they'd be like, ask Yolanda why we do something. She'll tell you. They'll say, is this a fasting holiday or an eating holiday? I'm like, what are you, nuts? This is a cheesecake holiday. How do you not know that? They're like, yes. It's just amazing. It's like, I got to teach you about Black and Jewish culture. Get out of here. So, you know.
Let me ask you a particular question, which I feel is an important area to cover for the members of our community who are the ones most likely to watch this. When people, in particular in our community, in the Jewish community at large, will hear about Black Lives Matter, for some it's going to convey a sentiment that Black lives matter. For others, it's going to convey a particular organization where each of those three letters are capitalized. And
yes.
That organization came out with a pretty complex manifesto a couple years back. And included in that, as I understand it, and I probably don't understand it anywhere nearly deeply enough. I read it years ago.
I've seen it too.
Yeah. Was a commitment to a policy against Israel known as boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And so for some people, you say Black Lives Matter, and as genuinely well-meaning as they are, a massive red flag goes up, and they say, oh wait, they're the people who don't like Israel. How could I possibly align myself with that? How would you like to see Jews reacting when they hear and when they react to Black Lives Matter, capital B, capital L, capital M?
Right. I would tell them that your average Joe Schmo Black person that I know, they don't even know what that's about. That's a faction. That's a more aggressive, elite, more little organized faction. It's just like the varieties of Judaism. You can't say Jews believe in heaven because not all Jews believe in heaven. You know what I mean? I can tell you my experience, that's not an ideology I have, you know, made a vow to. I doubt the people in my neighborhood even have heard of that. I would say that's more of a more extreme group. And it's no different than even in politics. You have the Working Families Party that shares some of the same ideologies of the Democratic, or you know what I mean? So I would tell people, don't be frightened by that. Most Black people are very cognizant of how much Jewish people have helped in the civil rights movement. I saw a photograph of a picture of Martin Luther King, and there was only one white gentleman there, and it was Bernie Sanders. You know, what's the rabbi, Henschel? He marched with, Martin Luther King. So I think your average Black person is not, you know, anti-Israel or anti-Jew. I think that's something that's been kind of inflated to get less momentum in the movement. I can tell you, and last week is the first time I've ever heard that. Like, we weren't given a booklet to sign and pledge, you know. So it's a whole spectrum of extremes.
It sounds like you're saying that that particular aspect of it, if you could even call it an aspect,
we don't get a handbook on Black Lives Matter.
that it was introduced by a faction of the whole group, but that it doesn't appear to be a common
it's
denominator.
not a major belief. No.
Okay.
No. We're too busy with our drama to be messing around with somebody else's. You know what I'm saying?
So let me ask you one more question.
I would say that that's propaganda, honestly.
Thank you. Okay.
None of my friends have a booklet on the movement.
So on that note, Oseh Shalom bimromav, U Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi. Call anytime.
Looking forward to being able to be in the same room as you.
Yes, soon.
Without a mask on.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.